going on YouTube? My name's Kevin, aka Gospel Gambit. Welcome back for another chess video. Today we're going to be climbing the rapid ladder on chess.com. We copied the game file over of a game that I just played, and we moved it over to Lichess for our analysis today. As you can see, the ratings are a little bit lower than usual. Lichess and chess.com just have different rating systems. Lichess is a little bit more inflated in general, and we just haven't played enough games on chess.com yet. Today we're going to be looking at a Caro-Kann Exchange variation with the move c3 from white on move 5. It's our second game in the Caro-Kann. The first one was also on chess.com, and that was with the hillbilly attack from white. Not a really solid opening choice from white. c3 from white is definitely more solid and tough to crack from our perspective as we play the black side of the pieces. So without further ado, let's dive into the game and get into the analysis. So the Caro-Kann starts with e4, c6, knight to f3, and d5. White elects to go into the exchange variation with e takes d, c takes d, and d4. We continue with the natural bishop to c6, and at this point, white can play a few different moves. We can see bishop out to b5, bishop to e2, d3. We can see the pan-off attack with c4, or like we see today, we can see the move c3, reinforcing the center and freeing up white's other knight to reinforce his knight on f3 later on in the game, especially as we bring our bishop out, which is what we do. If white gives us the chance to develop our light squared bishop outside of our pawn chain, we do take advantage of that. There are a few lines where you do have to be careful bringing your bishop out due to the weakened pawn on b7, but we'll go over those at a later date and when they arise. So in this game, white does play the move h3, attacking our bishop right away, and we elect to keep the pin and drop our bishop back to h5. Just be aware that evaluates if white does have the ability to push g4 and then dive into e5 with their knight. That's a common tactic. Not really a tactic, but it's a way for white to exchange their knight here on f3 for our light squared bishop. We'd much rather trade light squared bishops if possible, or keep a pin on the knight on f3. So white ends up playing this move queen to b3. That's also another advantage of white playing this c3 variation. It allows his queen to get over to the queen side more quickly and to attack us on a quicker note. So our b7 pawn is hanging at the moment. We want to make sure we keep tabs on our d5 pawn as well, as white's queen is eyeing both of those squares. So the natural move, queen to d7, keeps tabs on both of them. Rook to, let's say, rook to b8, just loses to bishop f4 here, as we're going to be having a lot of pressure coming down along our rook on the b file. So keep that in mind. If you can, most of the time you're going to be defending that b pawn with the queen. We jump up to d7, and after a4, which was a weird looking move, especially when combined with queen to b3, this queen is preventing any other pawn pushes along the b file, and white's going to have to waste some tempi moving their queen out of the way in order to support this pawn push on a4. I just ignore this move at this point in the game, and if white does elect to play a5 at any point, I will just play the simple move a6, halting the pawn. And like I said, it's going to take a few moves for white to even get down here and challenge our knight on c6 or make us feel uncomfortable at all. These two moves just don't really make any sense in tandem with each other. The computer wants us to take right away on f3. In this game, I don't elect to do that. It does double white's pawns here on the f file. I was just a little worried that white was going to have a quick attack down the g file, as I was planning on castling kingside in this game, and white still hadn't decided where they were going with their king. So I just continued my development with e6, and after bishop to e3, also another like slow move by white. c3 reinforces the center with a pawn, which is usually the best way to defend a pawn with another pawn. So white's dark square bishop would be way stronger out here on f4, where it can contest our dark square bishop. We would love this open diagonal for our dark squared bishop, as it's the most active that we can do for our dark square bishop. So after this move, we just continue our development, knight to f6, and white continues with knight to d2. We continue our final piece in development before we're able to castle, getting our bishop out to the favorable d6 diagonal. And after white plays bishop to d3, we slide our light squared bishop back, offering the exchange. And if white doesn't take our light squared bishop, we are more than happy to take his. Right now, his light squared bishop is hanging. So either is going to have to bring his queen back, waste another move with his bishop, or trade with ours. In this game, he does elect to trade, and we take back with our h-pawn, giving us some options. If we do elect to stay on castle this game, we could use the h-file if we wanted to, or just creating a strong center pawn mass. Now in this game, white does elect to go with king to e2, and at this point we're on move 13. Both sides have pretty much developed all their pieces. We still have the option to castle, and white elected not to. I kind of thought if he wasn't going to go kingside, that he should at least castle queenside to get his king out of the middle of the board and get his rook closer, at least to the middle of the board or to the king side for an attack. By putting his king on e2, I'm already starting to come up with middle game ideas. Castle, get both of our rooks to the middle here, and then we would love to just trade off our e-pawn or even our d-pawn. We want to get rid of these 3 pawns here and allow our rooks to do maximum pressure along the middle of the board. After castling, white ends up going with this move g4, not really threatening too much. We do have safe squares for our knight to retreat if white does elect to keep pushing that g-pawn. Like I said, we would love to get rid of a couple of these pawns here in the middle. So we even have ideas of tactics of getting our knight into e4, trading it off for maybe this horsey, and kind of getting some of our pawns out of our own way so we can deliver a checkmate down the middle of the board. And in this game, we end up sliding our rook over a to d8, and white ends up moving their dark squared bishop, putting our knight in a pin. But with no pawns to attack this bishop, I think I'd be happy with a capture. We'd have a nice little fort for our king to slide up to g7, and by having another pawn in the middle, it just supports our push on e5 even more so. So in that, if we pushed e4, e5 I should say, all of a sudden we have 2 major pawns rolling down the middle of the board with major piece support supporting them from behind. So we continue with sliding our rook over to e8, and white ends up jumping in the middle here, which supports our plan of what we wanted to do this whole time. And in this case, it just wins us a pawn. We wanted to open up the middle a bit, and after takes, we're up a pawn now. After we get our bishop out of the way, we're going to have ideas of pushing both the e and d pawns down the middle of the board. White's king is in the middle of nowhere with all the big pieces staring down at him. His queen's not doing too much besides putting a little bit of pressure on a queenside pawn that's not going to really matter at this point in the game. We also are defending our knight here on f6, and if white decides to trade, well, we get our bishop out of the way, and now we even have a dark square bishop staring down a pretty important diagonal, especially as we start pushing these pawns onto the dark squares in the middle of the board. White elects to go for f4. Now, we were already planning on moving our dark square bishop out of the way to begin with, And we don't want to block our big pieces here in the middle. Our knight has plenty of defense here with the pawn on g6. And c7 blocks our queen's defense of b7. So in this case, we just drop our bishop all the way back to b8. Does some light defending of the a7 pawn for whatever reason, as well as keeps an eye on this pretty open diagonal. White elects to continue moving their minor pieces into the middle of the board. I think they probably should have started moving some of their heavier pieces towards the middle of the board to help support their king, or even just start getting their king tucked away behind a few pawns. But as you can tell with the computer analysis, we're only up a pawn, but it's considered almost -4 at this point. So at this point, we elect to go for a exchange, a sacrifice exchange. We are giving white the rook on d8, and in return, we are taking out one of their minor pieces, which is their most active piece. We are also going to be picking up this free pawn on f4 if they go in for this trade. And if this pawn drops, all of a sudden our bishop is eyes wide open along this b8 to h2 diagonal. Our knight has ideas of jumping into g3, forking white's king and rook. And our knight is just a monster in the middle of the board. White does elect to go and take. We secure with the rook here, keeping our eyes on the b7 pawn as to not drop it. White moves their rook out of the possible fork, and in doing so, does drop the pawn on f4. Now you can see both of our minor pieces have all of a sudden become huge players in this middle game. Our major pieces are lined up down the middle of the board, right where we want them, and we're going to have ideas of getting these e pawns and d pawns rolling. White finally brings one of his rooks to the d file, and we slide our queen out of the way. We don't want to push just yet, as white, we don't want to have our queen opposite the white rook here on the d file. We'd much rather support it either from the side or support our bishop and get our queen into the action a different way. And white plays a big blunder here, which I do not take full advantage of. He plays knight to d4. And in this move, it does want us to slide our queen here into the middle with discovery ideas on white's queen and even possible checkmate ideas here in the middle of the board. Instead, we end up playing this check. I was getting my knight out of the way for ideas of sliding my queen into e5. I just kind of got the move order mixed up here. White slides his king over to d3, and we start our pawns rolling down the middle of the board, right? We had a game plan. Let's stick to it. Now, kind of before I went in on this, I had to calculate what was I going to be doing after white plays his knight over to b5. And after b5, I ended up moving my queen over to b6, taking advantage of all these dark squares that white does not have any control over. They just have control over this d4 square. I believe a better move that the computer says is playing queen to c5, c5, c6, or b6. So all three of these moves are relatively equal, c6 and c5 being slightly better, but pretty much it keeps a -3 to 3.5 advantage. After this move, white tries to tuck their king away into this corner, and at one point I was a little bit worried here that white was going to be able to get over to b1, a1, and my attack would fizzle out. But in that sense, I did have ideas of just getting behind this e-pawn, keeping it rolling down the middle of the board, going for a queen, or even trading here on d4 and trying to get this pawn all the way down the middle of the board. I play queen to f2 with check, just trying to get my queen into the action here. And after king b1, a6, kind of asking this knight where it wants to go. I can't go back here to d4 C3. It could drop all the way back to A3, which is in fact the top move. But that's kind of a tough move for, I think, most players to make, especially at this level. It just looks like it's out of the play, but in fact it is covering a lot of squares around the king and would be an integral defender for the white king here. Instead, they jumped into C7, which I kind of anticipated, and I played the immediate D4. White ends up taking, we take back, and in this case, that was my one major blunder here. We'll take a look at the tail of the tape at the end. For the most part, most of my moves I'd say were within the top 3 picks, but by taking back here on D4, it gives white the opportunity to have an even evaluation. As you can see, I have to find this move knight to E4. Only mover to keep the advantage going here. Remember, we're down a rook for a bishop and 2 pawns. By taking here, white does miss the immediate move knight to D5, kind of cutting off our rook's support of this D4 pawn and having our attack fizzle out. White slides their queen over here to A3. I'm not 100% sure what the point of this move was. Maybe they were trying to infiltrate here on the E7 square, but it just drops their bishop on C7. They miss that I could take back, and after queen takes on G3, they miss that we can take back with the bishop again, and white resigns here. They were in time trouble at this point. We both were under a minute. This was a 10-minute plus 5-second increment game. And after the game here, I kind of took a look at the evaluation, which I'll show at the final screen. But we kind of got through the early and middle game playing relatively solid moves, and we allowed white to overextend themselves playing these H pushes as well as their G pushes and leaving their king in the middle. Remember, having a safe king is super important, and whenever our opponent kind of puts their king in the middle of nowhere, form a game plan, bring your heavy pieces, bring your other pieces towards white's king or your opponent's king in whatever game you're playing, and have them firing at them at all costs, especially when they have no pawns in between your big pieces and their king. If you guys enjoyed the video today, please like and subscribe. Join us over on Skool.com. That's SKOOL.com. Look for Gospel Gambit Chess. On there, we have a community of like-minded chess players at the club level, all just trying to improve and get better at the game. I have free study plans for people, as well as my opening recommendations for both the white and black side of the pieces that have gotten me wins of players above the 2100 rapid rating on LeechChess.com, as well as other notable wins. Have a great day, guys.